Welcome to the NTDC podcast, Child Development. I'm your host, April Dinwiddie. The National Training and Development Curriculum for Foster and Adoptive Parents, or NTDC, is a 5-year cooperative agreement from the Administration on Children, Youth, and Families Children's Bureau. In this episode, we welcome Dr. Bruce Perry. Dr. Perry is a senior fellow of the Child Trauma Academy in Houston, Texas, and adjunct professor in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences at the Feinberg School of Medicine at Northwestern University in Chicago. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Perry.
Thank you very much, April.
Great. Thank you so much. We are going to dig into a big topic today of child development. And I think for most parents, they're not necessarily experts on child development. So what information do you think they really need to know?
Whenever I'm trying to talk about child development, I try to anchor people in their own personal experiences, children that they've seen, children they've known, and remind people that, they're pretty good observers. And then we go from there. The key thing I think about development is that most of us as adults, when we're living and working with children, we see them grow up and they get bigger, and we see them develop certain skills, and it might be a motor skill. They learn how to stand and they learn how to walk. It might be a regulation skill. They kind of are easily frustrated when they're really little, and then they learn how to control their feelings of discomfort. And then we see kids develop social skills and cognitive skills. They learn language, and then they learn how to put sentences together, and then they learn how to think in an abstract way. And so we see the sequence of development in all of these different domains. And one of the things that becomes a real challenge for parents who are living with children who've had developmental disruptions, whether it's trauma or attachment problems or intrauterine alcohol or any kind of developmental insult, is that the normal sort of synchronous development starts to fall apart. And what I mean by that is that you grow physically and you get to be chronologically 4, 5, 6, and 7, but you may not be like a 7-year-old when it comes to your emotional regulation or your social skills. And so you end up with what we call splinter development. And that is one of the hallmarks of the children that we tend to work with who've been impacted by developmental trauma.
Bruce, can you give us some specific examples here?
It can happen in a lot of different ways. So you'll have a 5-year-old child who has the self-regulation skills of a 2-year-old. And imagine the terrible twos in a 5-year-old body. And then let's imagine that they get even older. And then you have the terrible twos in a 10-year-old body. And so this is where some of the problems, behavioral problems and parenting problems emerge, is when there are these splinter capabilities. The adult world expects your 6-year-old to be able to act like a 6-year-old. And so when they're in kindergarten and the teacher tells them to do something, gives them a complex command to do A and then B and then C, the child is only cognitively capable of doing what a normal 2-year-old would do. And they can only follow through with command number 1. And they don't do 2 and 3. And so the teacher gets frustrated. And this sort of out of sync development is a major challenge for those of us that work with kids in foster and adoptive care. So again, one of the things that we see with many of the kids that enter foster care and many kids who are adopted is that their early developmental experiences were skewed in some way so that they get older, but they don't get the same kind of cognitive, social, emotional, or motor enrichment that leads to synchronous development of all of these domains. And so that's kind of where that splinter development comes from that I was referring to.
What should parents that are fostering or adopting be looking for specifically with the children they're parenting?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, oddly enough, it goes to the very heart of a successful, the creation of a successful relationship between the parent and the child. And really what they need to do, and this is hard to do sometimes, is be aware of the fact that even though Billy is 10, he may not have 10-year-old skills, and he may not have 10-year-old cognitive capabilities. He may not have 10-year-old social skills. He may not have 10-year-old motor skills. He may not have 10-year-old regulatory skills. And so as you get to know your child, recognize that, you know what, he may be socially like a 4-year-old, even though he's chronologically 10. And so what that means is, as a parent, you start to have expectations of his behavior that are developmentally matched to what he can really do. And then you provide developmental opportunities, learning opportunities, that are matched to his developmental age. And so if you give somebody who's got 4-year-old social skills, social learning opportunities of a 4.5-year-old, you're asking him to leave his comfort zone and practice new things, but the expectation is realistic. If you asked your chronologically 10-year-old child to participate in a social activity that was appropriate for 10-year-olds, your socially 4-year-old child would fail. And in that failure, they'd start to think their self-esteem would be impacted. And they will use usually maladaptive techniques to deal with the disappointment and the failure. So they'll disrupt, or they'll run away, or they'll use some sort of distraction technique, but really they won't end up learning. And so that in a nutshell is one of the biggest challenges of parenting. You have to meet them where they are. And it's hard to meet them where they are if you don't know where they are in these different domains. That's why assessment coming into care is a really important component of successful fostering and adopting as a parent.